all the time.
That's good.
Well, before I get started, Wednesday night, I wasn't feeling very good. I started getting sick on Thanksgiving, and Wednesday night, wasn't feeling good, so I thought I'd make myself a can of chicken noodle soup, because Campbell's chicken noodle soup is the best. I had homemade soup in the fridge. I made some 15-bean soup with ham hocks, which was really good, but I thought, I need some Campbell's. I went to the cabinet, just standing there, I thought I was going to pass out. I just felt so weak. I've been sick so long. So for the first time in my life, I went to urgent care. I told Tammy, I said, can you take me to urgent care? And she's like, yes, absolutely. It was about 7 or 8 o'clock at night. I don't remember what time. So we go in there and I walk in and they said, you've either got the flu or walking pneumonia. So thankfully it was neither of those. They tested me. She said I had bronchitis, upper respiratory infection, probably sinus infection. Thankfully, when she looked in one ear, she didn't see out the other, but she said, you got water right behind your ears, all this stuff. They gave me a couple of shots in my rear and then put me on some antibiotics. So I share that to say, number one, I'm not contagious. And number two, bear with me if my voice goes out. Also, before I get started, that was Wednesday night. Thursday at work, I got the call about my dad. And so I just thank you, everybody, for all the stuff on Facebook and text messages and phone calls and stuff. I feel very loved and I appreciate your sympathies. So thank you for that. Well, speaking of challenges, long before the gallon challenge, do you guys remember that one? Okay, so about 10 years ago, it made its wave on the internet of getting kids, like in the youth group, to drink a gallon of milk. And so they'll video this, and then the challenge is to drink the milk and not what? You can finish the rest of that. Long before the Tide Pod challenges, you remember that a few years ago? Teenagers would take the soap pods for washing your clothes and put those in their mouth. Long before planking, do you guys remember planking? Okay, so you find like a post or a chair and you try to lay on it with your stomach and keep your body straight. Remember that one? There's a newer one I didn't realize until this week called the chair to chest challenge. Okay, so you basically you back. There's two ways to do it. You back up against the wall and put your heels, and you have a chair in front of you. You try to lift up here. They say, yeah, you got to bend over, yeah, and get level. They say girls can do it, and guys can't. So, and then the other way too is you face the wall and you put your head against the wall and try to do it. How about the ice bucket challenge? You guys remember that one for ASL or ALS, however you say it? That was on the internet for a while. How about the cinnamon challenge? Do you remember that one? A spoonful of cinnamon. I guess it'll stop you from breathing. Now the newest one that I'm aware of, it seems to be really enticing. People are not only doing it to themselves, they're doing it to their children. You take like a construction bag size garbage bag, one of the big black ones, and you put someone in there and you put the bag tight around their neck, and then you stick a vacuum cleaner in there and you suck all the air out so that it, I know, Rodney, I know you're looking at me like, I can't make this stuff up. It's on the internet. It's there for you to see. Long before all these challenges, there has been the challenge of how to find what the good life is and how to live it. At least from the time of Socrates, a few hundred years before Christ, philosophers, theologians, poets, deep thinkers would propose the question, what is the good life? And of course, they would endlessly debate that. And I guess the following Saturday, they would meet and say, okay, well, how do we live this good life? What is the good life, and how do I live it? I think in America today, if you were to ask a general public, what's the good life? They would say, I want to be successful, right? And then, of course, you have to say, well, how do you define success? What is success? And I think most people would probably tie it to financial security or, having everything the way they want it and everything being good. This is the good life. I'm happy, I'm comfortable, I'm not experiencing difficulties. That's not at all what we read in the Gospels. Matthew chapter 5 through 7 is what's called the Sermon on the Mount. And it's actually one message. You know, a lot of people will think of the first 11 or 12 verses of Matthew chapter 5, and what do we call those? The Beatitudes, right? And so we think, well, that's a sermon by itself. And then he'll go into the next phase, and maybe that's another sermon. It's not. If we understand the text correctly, it's one message that starts at the beginning of chapter 5 and doesn't wrap up until the end of chapter 7. Now, there's a good chance that Jesus delivered his message more than once to different people in different places, but that's a period that's collected. But I'm of the opinion, I've said it before, I believe Jesus only had one message. Jesus only had one sermon, and he delivers it in different ways, but his one sermon was, the kingdom is available to anyone. God's presence. Kingdom just means God's rule, his authority, his reign, his power, his presence is amongst us, and it's accessible to anyone from any background, any perspective. Anyone that wants to submit to Jesus can be part of it. And so everything that Jesus has to say through the Gospels is expanding that message. The kingdom of God is here, and you are welcome to be a participant in it. And I think that is Jesus's not answer or response to what is the good life, but I do believe that's his presentation. You want to know what the good life is? It's being part of the kingdom. It's being a participant with what God is doing in the here and now. It's not just about the future. So many people think, I'm going to go to church, I'm going to be part of church because I'm worried about eternity. I challenge you, no pun intended, we're talking about challenges, but try to see how many times Jesus talks about the afterlife. It's not a big priority in his message. It's not the most important thing that he talks about. Is eternity with God a priority? Is that really important? Yes. Does Jesus talk about heaven? Does he talk about hell? Yes. Are those real concepts? Are they realities? Yes. Jesus, and I've not read a statistic somewhere, but I can tell you from my reading of the scriptures, the majority of what he talks about is how you and I live in this life, in the here and now. He doesn't deal with your past. He doesn't deal with your future nearly as much as he talks about, I want you to have the good life right here, right now. This is, I've come to give you life into abundance, right? It's in the here and it's in the now. And so, to me, a particularly interesting paragraph in the Sermon on the Mount is what Amber just read for us. This eye for an eye, this tooth for a tooth, this turning the other cheek, this going the other mile, all of these things that he talks about here, to me are really interesting. And if we could bring the passage back up for a second, please, Wendy. I want to show you something that's really interesting to start with. So, in verse 38, Jesus says, you have heard that it was said. Now, he's doing this for two, I think, purposes, two particular reasons. Number one, he's saying you've heard it said because he's wanting the people to kind of process and grapple with the ways that maybe some of their rabbis of the day or some of the religious people have misused, misunderstood, have abused the scriptures. Well, you know, you've heard the Bible said, and now you've got an excuse to do whatever you want. You've heard it said in the Old Testament, eye for an eye, right? And that's giving you a license in a sense. But the second and more important reason that Jesus starts off with this is so that he can get to the verse 39. But I tell you, I get goosebumps thinking about this because Jesus is showing that he is superior to the law and he's superior to Moses. What you and I don't usually think about is Moses as an elevated authority figure in our lives. But to understand the context of the Gospels and of the ministry of Jesus, it is vitally important to understand that Moses was second only to God in the mind of Jesus' audience. He speaks to God on Mount Sinai. He gets the covenant revealed to him. He delivers the law. Moses is huge. I mean, really big. And so Jesus is saying, you've heard it said, and they're quoting Moses, and a lot of people kind of misquoted him, misused him, abused the text. But I say to you, in other words, I am superior. You've heard this. but now I'm going to tell you the way it really is. That's pretty amazing when you stop to think about that. So an eye for an eye, lex talionis. Have you heard that phrase, lex talionis? It's the Latin law of retaliation. Other cultures, other belief systems have had something similar to this eye for an eye, tooth for a tooth, all through history. And so Jesus brings this up from the Old Testament, this eye for an eye, and it's about retaliation. It's about limiting injustice. So in other words, have you ever been wounded? Anyone betray you? Anyone ever stab you in the back? Anyone ever really hurt your feelings? You ever been butthurt before? And the first temptation that comes to mind is, I'm going to what? Well, if they did that to me, I'll show them. Oh, they want to play games? Oh, yeah. You want to mess with me in my house? Guess what? I'm going to come down like a ton of bricks. And basically what this says is if someone cuts off your finger, you can't chop off their whole arm. What you're entitled to under this eye for an eye is if someone knocks out your eye, you knock out their eye, and it stops you from going further. Well, retaliation, reciprocation, that seems pretty fair. You knocked out my eye. I really want to hurt you, but I've got to observe this. I've got to be limited. And Jesus flips that whole concept on its head. He takes that away and he turns it into something completely different. Something counterintuitive. Something that when at first blush we read it says, wait a minute. Oh, I see where he's going with this. Christians are to be doormats. And if you get hung up on that, the rest of the passage is never going to be released. It's never going to be opened up. It's not going to be able to be pretty much internalized and lived out. That's not what Jesus is doing. So, I like the idea of limiting an escalation to aggression. One eye, one tooth, one tooth. But Jesus says, I've got something even better for you. Do you really think that taking their tooth away is going to replace your tooth? You really think knocking their eye out is going to restore sight to your eye? Do you really think you're going to have freedom from the obsession with your anger and bitterness and resentment by lashing back out at them? Well, Jesus could say, for 1,500 years, because that's how long ago it was since Moses delivers the law. For 1,500 years, people have tried it and it didn't work. People still try it today. Does it work? Chinese have a proverb, if you seek revenge, dig 2 graves. Jesus says that's not going to work. But if you want resolution, if you want freedom, listen, time out. I'm not into magical thinking. People will hurt you. People do hurt you. That's part of reality. None of us are immune to that. Jesus says when that happens, and it does happen, I have something better. Jesus is basically, in a sense, saying duty and obligation are only going to carry you so far. You're trying to observe this law. It's only going to carry you so far, but I've got something that can take you all the way. I've got something that's even better. What we're reading about here in this passage is the reality that there will be people that will torment us. There will be people that will oppress us. Jesus talks about people who try to coerce you. They try to twist your arm. And Jesus, time and time again, he'll say, you've heard it said, eye for an eye, but I tell you, don't resist the evil person, right? If they slap you in the right cheek, and I preached a sermon on that several years ago and described how culturally, if you're slapped on the right cheek, for you to turn the left cheek, to either have to backhand you or use their left hand. And in that culture, their left hand is what they wiped their hiney with. And it was unclean. You didn't do anything in public. In the days of Jesus, when you went to the market, when you went shopping, when you were at the synagogue, wherever, you didn't touch things with your left hand. It was your unclean, ceremonially and I guess metaphorically, unclean hand. Right? So there's something deeper to this. There's an equality thing here. If you're going to slap me, turn the other cheek, you can't, and nobody backhands you back then. And they can't slap you with the other hand. There's a lot of nuances to it. But again, evil person, don't resist if they turn the other cheek. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your shirt, hand over your coat as well. That makes no sense to us. Read in the Old Testament how people use their tunic, their outer coat, as a deposit, as a guarantee for money that they borrowed. And in the law of Moses, you had to return it to that person at night so they weren't cold. I could go to Walmart and get a jacket or a sweatshirt for $30, $40, right? Something that could keep me warm all winter. Back then, believe it or not, your cloak was almost valued as much as a home. They didn't have textile mills to make things. It was labor intensive. You had to harvest the wool off of sheep or flax, and you had to spin it, and you had to weave it together. And it was a very expensive accessory for a person back then. So Jesus says, well, if they want to take your shirt, give them your coat as well. Getting to something deeper, getting to something further. You got to be asking yourself, don't resist the evil person. If they want your shirt, give them your cloak or your coat as well. If anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go with them 2. The one who asks, don't turn away. Why? Where is he going with this? There's got to be a purpose here. There's got to be something going on here. You got to start asking the question, why does Jesus want us? You were a school teacher, Jimmy, right? Amber, you're a school teacher. What happens in class when kids start slapping each other? The kid who gets slapped wants to know, why are you yelling at me, right? Johnny slapped me. I want what's fair. I want what's fair. That's not fair. Why doesn't Jesus address the knuckleheads that are knocking out our eye, that are suing us for our coat, that are slapping us in the cheek, that are forcing us to go to mouth? Why doesn't he talk to them? I am the innocent one here. Why do I have any respect? You got to start asking that question. Jesus is taking us somewhere. Something's going on. I know. So someone slaps me in the cheek. Someone. Most of you know we run a small business. And last year we pumped some concrete for this guy out of North Carolina who didn't pay me. Called him, stopped answering his calls. Texted him, didn't return the text. So I did what any concrete guy would do. Found out where he lived online in North Carolina, and I drove down there. 15 minutes before I got to the house, he texted me a FedEx check. He didn't know I was in town. It'd been weeks since I heard from him. But let's just say I go to this guy who doesn't pay me, and I say, guess what? You know what? I'm a Christian. I'm a preacher. No, you didn't know that about me. I'm going to forgive that debt. You think he's going to fall down on his knees and say, look, behold, here's water. What prevents me from being baptized? Exactly. He's like, I'm going to save that phone number. If you think I'm going to turn my cheek, I'm going to limit my resistance, I'm going to give them my coat, and all of a sudden that person is going to have this, Jesus is Lord and Savior. Your actions have just showed me how great He is in this Lord. I'm sure it will leave a good impression, but I doubt there's going to be a transformation in their life. I doubt they're going to change their misbehavior. The passage isn't about them. The passage is about us. So if you're asking the question, why does Jesus want me to respond to them? It isn't about them. It's about me. Yeah, it gives them something to think about. If we want to truly live the good life, we want to know what the good life is and how to live it, I've got to be transformed and I've got to be liberated. Liberated from what? You know, Jesus says if someone tells you to go a mile, in that day and age, you probably already know how this works. The Roman legionaries could come through town, and they would be carrying their military gear, and the way the law was set up, they could force a Jewish young man, they could press him into service for only 1 mile. So he could say, you have to carry all my military gear. And under the law, that boy would have to carry it. So they memorized in their towns and their villages every mile marker. That is true. They did that. So that as they're forced and they're compelled to do it, they would carry, and when they got to that mile, they would drop it and they would smug and they'd say, you can't make me take another step further. Boy, I bet that felt good, right? Little Jewish boy back talking this Roman soldier. And Jesus says no. And he uses a military technical term. Press you into service is what it is in the original language. If someone presses you into service, if they coerce you, if they force you to do something against your will, why? Is that Roman soldier going to drop down and say, oh yeah, your God must be the real God? No. It's not about that person. True freedom, true control, true power over the life around us cannot be controlled by people who oppress us, wound us, betray us, injure us, harm us, hate us, despise us, backstab us, trample us. Because then they're in control, and that becomes your God. Whoever you allow to control you, control your thoughts, consume your heart, have control and sway over your mind and heart and emotion, that is the God you worship. Wait a minute, that dirtbag jerk that hurt me, that keeps me up at night that I think about, you're telling me that that's my God? That person that slapped me in the cheek and they got me all tore up inside, if you're giving them more attention, more time, more of your heart than you are to God, then that has become our God. The real power, listening, and I bet you told your kids this when they were preteens and you forgot it. Real power is doing what you don't have to do. That's what Jesus comes down to. True control, true power is doing what you don't have to do when you don't have to do it. Corollary principle of that is being able to say no. You know, that's part of the problem with our culture. We don't know about delayed gratification, and we run up credit card bills, and we get into financial trouble, and we do things that aren't happening, but I don't have to say no to myself. Ooh, it's bright and shiny. I'm like a raccoon. I want to get it. I don't know how to say no. Acting without being compelled. Yes, that guy has the authority to make you go 1 mile. He can't make you go a second. And as hard as it is to comprehend, that is true liberation. That is real freedom. But he made me go 1 mile. But he can't make me go the next. That's true liberation. So let me wrap up with this, because this is in the context of people who are trying to obey the law of the Old Testament. Are you bound by rules? Are you a person who is bound by rules and the manipulation of others? Because that's what we see in this paragraph. Religious laws, and I'm just summing up as manipulation. People manipulate. Are you consumed by the wounds that others inflict? Keep on going is what Jesus says. Keep on going. Doing more than socially accepted standards is going to speak a louder message about you. It's not about them. So you could sum it up and say legalism only takes you so far, but grace has no limits. Because Jesus is ushering in grace. Right? John chapter 1. Law came through Moses, right? Verse 117. But grace and truth comes through Jesus. So really, I really want to say is, you always have a choice. How you choose to make that choice is all the difference.